It was a typical day for James, a man just trying to make it through another quiet shift at the space station. He worked as a technician. Nothing special, just a small cog in the great machine that kept the station running smoothly. The stars outside his windows sparkled like diamonds, but it was nothing he hadn't seen before. His life was simple, routine, and to be honest, a little dull. But that all changed the moment he stepped into the maintenance corridor. James had walked this path hundreds of times before. It was the route he took to check the station's cooling system, a job he usually completed without much thought. The corridor was dimly lit, with flickering lights overhead, but he didn't mind. The hum of the station was strangely comforting, like the heartbeat of the place. However, today felt different. As he approached the corner, he noticed something odd. The door to a restricted section, which was always locked, stood ajar. He had no reason to go inside, but curiosity nudged him forward. It was quiet, too quiet. No alarms, no warning signs, just the soft echo of his footsteps. When James stepped through the door, the temperature seemed to drop, and a sudden chill ran up his spine. It was then that he saw her. She stood in the center of the room, bathed in soft blue light from a malfunctioning generator. Her presence was unlike anything James had ever felt before. She was tall, her figure almost glowing with an ethereal quality, as though she was not fully part of this world. Her skin shimmered with a strange iridescence, and her eyes, deep and mysterious, locked onto his instantly. Who are you?" James stammered, his heart racing. The woman smiled, but it was not the smile of someone unfamiliar with the situation. No, it was as if she had been waiting for him. "I am Elira," she said, her voice melodic and soothing, yet carrying an undeniable force. "And you, human, are destined to be my soulmate." James blinked, not understanding what she was saying. His first thought was that she was insane. "Soulmate," he repeated, incredulous. "I don't even know you. You're an alien, aren't you?" Elira's eyes softened, but her confidence didn't waver. "I am not just any alien, James. I am of a race that has seen the threads of fate. Our bond is written in the stars, and no one can stop it." James felt a strange sensation pulse through him, as though her words were not just something she was saying, but something that was happening deep inside him. He could feel the weight of her presence, pressing against his chest like a force of nature. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "You will understand in time," Elira said, taking a slow step toward him. "But know this, human, our connection is already stronger than you realize. It's not a matter of choice, it is fate." James stepped back, his mind racing. He had heard of strange encounters in space, but nothing like this. No one had ever mentioned a soulmate bond with an alien. He wanted to laugh it off, but something in Elira's eyes made him hesitate. This was not a joke. This was something much bigger than anything he had ever imagined. The chill in the air deepened, and he could feel the weight of her words pressing against him. She wasn't leaving. And neither, it seemed, was he. James couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. Elira, the alien woman, stood before him, her presence overwhelming. She had said it so confidently. "You are my soulmate." But how could that be? He was just a regular human, no different from the thousands who lived on the station. How could his life be tied to hers in a way he couldn't understand? He took a step back, his mind racing. This is crazy. I don't even know you. How can we be soulmates?" Elira's eyes never left him. Her calm, unshakable demeanor was like a rock in a storm. "You don't need to understand it yet, James. It's not something you can explain. It's something you feel. A bond stronger than any force in the universe. It's been written in the stars for eons. Our fates are intertwined." James swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. This was insane. He had heard of stories like this, of strange alien races with their mysterious ways, but never had he imagined he would be part of one. The more Elira spoke, the more his skepticism started to waver. There was a certain intensity in her words, a truth to them, that made him question everything he thought he knew. "Are you saying this is fated?" James asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what you mean." Alyra stepped closer, her presence filling the room. "Yes, James, I am part of an ancient race, one that has existed for millennia. My people have seen the threads of destiny, and they have seen you. You are the one I am meant to be with. Our bond is not just of love or attraction, it is a cosmic force. No matter where we go, no matter what happens, you and I are destined to be together." James took another step back, feeling like he was being pulled in two different directions. His logical mind told him to run, to get away from this woman and whatever strange fate she spoke of. But his heart was telling him something else. It was a strange feeling, like an invisible thread was pulling him toward her, tugging him in a way he couldn't explain. "This is a lot to take in," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You're an alien. You can't just tell me we're soulmates. It doesn't make sense." Alyra smiled softly, her eyes filled with a mixture of compassion and understanding. "I know it is hard to accept, James, but I promise you, the connection is already there. The universe has already chosen us, and no one can stop it." The words settled over James like a heavy weight. He couldn't explain it, but deep inside, he knew she wasn't lying. He felt something, some strange force that made his chest ache when she spoke. It was as if her words were unlocking something within him, something that had always been there, but had been hidden, waiting. "I don't know what to say," James murmured, almost to himself. "You don't need to say anything yet," Alyra replied gently. "Just know that I will always be here. We are already bound, and that bond will only grow stronger as time goes on." James stood in silence, the room suddenly feeling too small. He had no idea what he was supposed to do with this information, but one thing was certain: his life had just changed in a way he could never have imagined. James couldn't stop thinking about Alyra. Her words echoed in his mind, haunting him like a melody that refused to fade. "We are destined to be together." He kept telling himself it was impossible, that this was all some kind of mistake, but no matter how hard he tried, the idea of this strange bond kept pulling at him. He went back to his quarters, trying to distract himself with work, but the moment he walked through the door, the air felt heavy. Something was different, like the walls themselves were watching him. He shook his head, trying to focus, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Alyra. How could a soulmate bond even be real? He wasn't the type to believe in things like fate or destiny, but somehow he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. The next day, when he returned to his duties, things started to feel odd. The station's systems, which were usually reliable, began to malfunction in strange ways. Lights flickered, doors opened and closed without command, and even the temperature seemed to fluctuate unnaturally. At first, James thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe the station's old systems were starting to break down. But as he walked down the hall to check on the cooling units, he felt an undeniable presence. And there she was. Alyra stood at the end of the corridor, her figure glowing softly in the dim lights. She didn't speak, but her gaze locked onto his, as if she had been waiting for him. Her presence was magnetic, powerful yet calming, like the calm before a storm. "Is this your doing?" James asked, his voice a mix of frustration and curiosity. "What's going on with the station? All these malfunctions?" Alyra stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "It is not my doing, James, but it is because of me that this is happening." He frowned. "What do you mean? I don't get it. Are you saying you're behind all of this?" "No," Alyra said, her voice soft but firm. "The bond between us is stronger than you realize. It is a force that affects everything around us. The energy between us is causing the station to react. The systems, the machines, they can't ignore it." James stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "So, What? The station's breaking down because of you and me. Because of this bond you keep talking about. Not because of us, Elira corrected, but because the universe is responding to the change. Our connection is not just personal, it is cosmic. And when two souls like ours meet, the balance shifts. That is why this is happening. James felt his heart race. This was impossible. It didn't make sense. Yet, as the room seemed to hum with energy, he couldn't deny that something was different. The air felt charged, as if the space around them was alive. I didn't ask for this, he said, frustration creeping into his voice. I didn't ask for any of this. I know, Elira replied, her voice gentle. But the choice was never yours to make. It was always going to be this way. James stepped back, his mind spinning. What am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to fix it? You don't need to fix anything, Elira said. You need to accept it. Accept us. James looked at her, torn between running and staying. There was a part of him that wanted to walk away, to forget about this entire situation. But another part of him, deep inside, knew that was impossible. Whatever this bond was, it was not something he could ignore. As he stood there, facing Elira, he realized one thing. There was no going back. He wasn't just dealing with an alien. He was dealing with fate itself. James couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elira's face, her eyes filled with a mixture of understanding and certainty. Our bond is cosmic, she had said. And even though he didn't fully understand what that meant, he couldn't deny that something had changed in him. The days that followed were filled with strange occurrences. His mind kept wandering back to Elira and her words. It was like a constant hum in his thoughts. The station had returned to its normal state, but James couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for him. Something big. He tried to ignore it, tried to focus on his work, but every time he entered a room or passed someone in the halls, he felt it, the pull. It wasn't just his mind, it was his body, his very soul. It was as if the universe itself was nudging him toward Elira. The next time he saw her, it was in a quiet corridor near the station's docking bay. She stood there, as if she had been waiting for him. Her figure, though calm, seemed to radiate energy, and for the first time, James understood what she meant. She wasn't just an alien. She was a force of nature, something he couldn't fight or explain. James, Elira said softly, her voice a smooth whisper that seemed to flow straight to his heart. I see the confusion in your eyes, but I need you to trust me. The bond between us is not just about love or attraction. It is a part of the universe's design. There is a reason we were chosen. James stopped in his tracks, his chest tightening. He wanted to argue, wanted to walk away, but he couldn't. Every word she spoke seemed to settle in his mind like a stone dropped into water, causing ripples that spread deep within him. I don't understand, he said, the frustration clear in his voice. How can this be real? I'm just a human. I'm nothing special. You are special, James, she replied, her eyes softening. And that is why we are connected. You may not see it yet, but our souls are tied. The moment we met, the connection was formed. It cannot be undone. James swallowed hard. So what now? What do you want from me? I want you to embrace this bond, she said. I want you to accept who we are together, because this is just the beginning. James shook his head, the weight of her words pressing down on him. I can't. This is too much. I don't even know how to begin to understand any of this. Elira took a small step forward, closing the gap between them. Her gaze didn't waver. I know this is hard for you, James. But remember, this isn't just about us. This bond will affect everything around us. The universe needs it. We are the key to something much bigger than either of us. He stood frozen, unsure of what to say. But before he could speak, the air around them seemed to shift. There was a sudden, strange pull that drew him closer to her, like a magnetic force he couldn't resist. And for a brief moment, he felt it, the bond. It wasn't just in his mind anymore. It was in his chest, his hands, his very being. He could feel her. He could feel their connection, as if it were a living, breathing thing. "Don't fight it," Elira whispered. "We are already one." James closed his eyes, his heart racing. Everything around him seemed to fade away, leaving only Elira and the connection they shared. He didn't know what to do with this feeling, but deep inside, he knew one thing. His life would never be the same again. The days that followed were a blur for James. He could no longer ignore the connection between him and Elira. It was as though it was always there, lingering just beneath the surface, waiting for him to accept it, no matter how hard he tried to push it away. The pull kept getting stronger. Elira had warned him, but he never expected things to escalate the way they did. James was walking through the station's central hall when he noticed something strange. People were whispering, glancing at him with uneasy expressions. It was subtle, but the tension in the air was palpable. Something wasn't right. He had only been on the station for a few months, but he had already made a few friends, fellow crew members, technicians like himself. They'd always treated him like everyone else, but now they were acting differently. He felt eyes on him everywhere he went. It wasn't until later that he realized what was happening. He entered the break room for a cup of coffee, but as he did, he overheard a conversation between two officers standing nearby. They were speaking in hushed tones, but James could make out the words clearly. "We can't let this go on much longer. If the council finds out, it's already too late." She's marked him. They're connected now. The prophecy is in motion. James froze, his hand gripping the edge of the table. He had no idea what they were talking about, but he could feel his pulse quicken. He moved closer, pretending not to overhear, but his mind raced. "Who's marked me?" he thought to himself, but the word prophecy echoed in his head. "The council? What prophecy?" As the two officers continued to talk, they didn't notice James standing there. One of them looked around nervously before continuing. "If they find out, if anyone finds out about the bond, it will cause chaos. It's forbidden. Their union was never meant to happen." James's heart pounded in his chest. A forbidden bond. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He didn't know who they were, but the way the officers spoke about him, and Elira made it clear that this wasn't just some random encounter. This was serious. The officers didn't speak much more before one of them left the room, but the damage was done. James couldn't ignore what he had heard. There was more to this than Elira had told him. The bond between them wasn't just a beautiful connection. It was dangerous. He left the break room in a daze, trying to make sense of everything. Elira had said their bond was inevitable, but now he wasn't so sure. There were forces out there who wanted to stop them. Who were they? Why was this bond so important? James needed answers, but when he tried to contact Elira, she was nowhere to be found. Panic began to set in. What had he gotten himself into? Later that evening, he returned to his quarters, exhausted and overwhelmed. His mind kept replaying the conversation he had overheard. It was clear that someone didn't want him and Elira to be together, and whoever they were, they would stop at nothing to make sure that didn't happen. He sat down on his bed, trying to steady his breathing. The walls of his quarters felt closer than ever before. Elira's warning echoed in his mind. No one can stop it. But now, James wasn't so sure. Whoever these people were, they were going to try. And that meant danger for both of them. The days that followed were a blur for James. He could no longer ignore the connection between him and Elira. It was as though it was always there, lingering just beneath the surface, waiting for him to accept it. No matter how hard he tried to push it away, the pull kept getting stronger. Elira had warned him, but he never expected things to escalate the way they did. James was walking through the station's central hall when he noticed something strange. People were whispering, glancing at him with uneasy expressions. It was subtle, but the tension in the air was palpable. Something wasn't right. He had only been on the station for a few months, but he had already made a few friends, fellow crew members, technicians like himself. They'd always treated him like everyone else, but now they were acting differently. He felt eyes on him everywhere he went. It wasn't until later that he realized what was happening. He entered the break room for a cup of coffee, but as he did, he overheard a conversation between two officers standing nearby. They were speaking in hushed tones, but James could make out the words clearly. "We can't let this go on much longer. If the council finds out, it's already too late." She's marked him. They're connected now. The prophecy is in motion. James froze, his hand gripping the edge of the table. He had no idea what they were talking about, but he could feel his pulse quicken. He moved closer, pretending not to overhear, but his mind raced. "Who's marked me?" he thought to himself, but the word prophecy echoed in his head. The council. What prophecy? As the two officers continued to talk, they didn't notice James standing there. One of them looked around nervously before continuing. "If they find out, if anyone finds out about the bond, it will cause chaos. It's forbidden. Their union was never meant to happen." James's heart pounded in his chest. A forbidden bond. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He didn't know who they were, but the way the officers spoke about him, and Alira made it clear that this wasn't just some random encounter. This was serious. The officers didn't speak much more before one of them left the room, but the damage was done. James couldn't ignore what he had heard. There was more to this than Alira had told him. The bond between them wasn't just a beautiful connection. It was dangerous. He left the break room in a daze, trying to make sense of everything. Alira had said their bond was inevitable, but now he wasn't so sure. There were forces out there who wanted to stop them. Who were they? Why was this bond so important? James needed answers, but when he tried to contact Alira, she was nowhere to be found. Panic began to set in. What had he gotten himself into? Later that evening, he returned to his quarters, exhausted and overwhelmed. His mind kept replaying the conversation he had overheard. It was clear that someone didn't want him and Alira to be together, and whoever they were, they would stop at nothing to make sure that didn't happen. He sat down on his bed, trying to steady his breathing. The walls of his quarters felt closer than ever before. Alira's warning echoed in his mind. No one can stop it. But now, James wasn't so sure. Whoever these people were, they were going to try. And that meant danger for both of them. James ran as fast as his legs could carry him, his mind racing faster than his body. He had no idea where he was going, but he couldn't stop. The officer's warning echoed in his ears. "They're coming for you. They're coming for both of you." The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, but James didn't dare slow down. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone following him. The dim lights of the station flickered above, casting eerie shadows on the walls. His breath came in ragged gasps, and his heart pounded in his chest. But it wasn't just fear that gripped him. It was the feeling of being completely out of control. A few moments ago, he had felt like he was part of something bigger, something grand. Now he felt like a pawn in a game he didn't understand. Who were these people? What did they want with him and Alira? He turned a corner and found himself in a quieter section of the station. It was isolated, almost deserted, the perfect place to hide. He stopped to catch his breath, his thoughts a jumbled mess. His mind kept going back to Alira. Was she safe? Was she even still here on the station, or had they already taken her? He pulled out his communicator, desperate to contact her. But there was no signal. Panic crept in as he realized he couldn't reach her. What was he supposed to do now? A sharp sound broke through the silence. A footstep behind him. James spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. Alira stood there, looking as calm and composed as ever. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, he forgot everything else. "I knew you would come for me," she said softly. "Alira," James breathed, relief flooding through him. He stepped forward, but then, Doubts crept back in. Are you okay? Is everyone after you? Who can we trust? Elira didn't answer right away. She seemed to be measuring her words carefully, her expression unreadable. We are running out of time, she said finally. They're close, James. We don't have much longer before they make their move. James nodded, feeling the weight of the situation crash down on him. He had a choice to make, one that would change everything. Elira had told him that their bond was destined, that it was a force neither of them could escape. But now it didn't feel so simple. He wasn't just dealing with his own feelings. He was dealing with the fate of two species, an ancient prophecy, and forces beyond his understanding. Where do we go from here? James asked, his voice tight with uncertainty. What happens now? Elira's gaze softened, but there was still a steely resolve in her eyes. Now you choose, James. We can run together. Find a place where we're safe. But you must understand, if we do that, we will always be hunted. This bond, it changes everything. It will change both of our worlds. James's mind raced. He had always been a man of logic, of practicality. He wasn't ready for this kind of decision. But when he looked at Elira, something deep within him stirred. A feeling he couldn't explain. Could he live with himself if he walked away? Could he leave her to face this alone? No matter what happens, Elira said, I will be by your side. James swallowed hard, his mind made up. Then we fight. We face whatever comes together. Elira nodded, a slight smile touching her lips. Together. With that, James knew there was no turning back. They were in this together, no matter the cost. James and Elira stood side by side in the dimly lit corridor, their breath steady but their hearts racing. The air was thick with tension. They had made their choice. They would fight. But as the footsteps approached, it became clear that their enemies had already arrived. James looked at Elira, who was standing taller now, her posture more confident than he had ever seen before. She was no longer the mysterious alien he had met days ago. She was a leader, someone who had embraced their connection, and was ready to face whatever came next. We have to be ready, Elira said quietly, her eyes scanning the hallway ahead. They're not just after us. They're after the power we hold. Our bond is stronger than they ever anticipated. James nodded, his hand instinctively reaching for the small weapon he kept hidden on his belt. He didn't know how to fight, but he was determined to protect Elira. He had already lost too much time doubting everything. Now there was no turning back. A shadow moved in the distance, followed by the sound of boots hitting the metal floor. Several armed guards rounded the corner, their eyes narrowing as they saw the two of them standing there, prepared for a confrontation. Step aside, one of the guards barked, raising his weapon. You don't know what you're dealing with. This is your last warning. James felt his heart skip a beat. There was no way out. But as he looked at Elira, he saw a glimmer of something stronger in her eyes. Determination. She stepped forward, standing tall and unafraid. You don't get it, do you? She said, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable force. You can try to stop us, but it won't work. We are destined to be together. And there's nothing you can do to break that bond. The guards looked confused for a moment, exchanging uneasy glances. They had been trained for every kind of resistance, but they weren't prepared for what they were facing now. We don't have time for this, the lead guard said, motioning to his team. Take them down. Before the guards could make their move, Elira's hand shot out, her fingers glowing with an energy James had never seen before. The air around her crackled with power as she released a burst of energy that sent the guards flying back, slamming them against the walls of the corridor. James's eyes widened in shock. He had known Elira was strong, but this was something else entirely. She was no ordinary alien. She was a force of nature. The remaining guards scrambled to their feet, but they were no match for Elira's power. She moved with precision, each motion quick and deliberate, her energy overwhelming them before they had a chance to regroup. Within moments, the hallway was clear. James stood frozen, his mind still reeling from the display of power he had just witnessed. Alyra had saved them, but she had also shown him the depth of the bond they shared. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for their future. Alyra turned to him, her expression softening. "It's over for now," she said. "But this is only the beginning. They will come again, and next time, it won't be as easy." James nodded, his heart still racing from the confrontation. But as he looked at Alyra, he knew one thing for certain. They were stronger together. And no matter what came next, they would face it side by side. "Then we'll be ready," he said firmly. Together, they turned and walked down the corridor, the future uncertain but their bond unbreakable. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, but they were ready for whatever challenges awaited them. The aftermath of the confrontation left James and Alyra standing in the quiet, empty hallway. The guards, once a threat, now lay motionless on the floor, their weapons discarded and forgotten. Alyra's power had been overwhelming, and though James had seen it in flashes, this was the first time he fully understood what she was capable of. As they walked through the station, there was a strange sense of calm that had settled over them. They had won, for now, but the tension still lingered in the air. Alyra had been right. This was just the beginning. "Are you sure it's over?" James asked, his voice low but steady as they made their way to a quiet corner of the station. "For now," Alyra replied. "But they won't stop coming. They fear what our bond represents. And the more they try to stop us, the stronger it will grow." James nodded, his mind racing. The bond was something he still didn't fully understand, but he knew one thing for sure. It was real. And it was unlike anything he had ever felt before. It wasn't just a connection. It was a force, something that connected them on a level deeper than either of them could explain. "I still don't understand why they're so afraid," James said. "What does it mean for them? Why does our connection matter so much?" Alyra looked at him, her expression softening. "Our bond isn't just about us, James. It's about the balance of power. My people have been divided for centuries, and their strength has always been limited by fear, pride, and the old ways. But our bond, our union, represents something different. It's a bridge, a way to unite not just our worlds, but others as well." James's mind swirled with this new information. He had never thought of their connection like that. He had been so focused on the personal side of it, on the strange feelings, the undeniable pull, that he hadn't realized how much it affected everything around them. Alyra continued, her voice quieter now. "When two souls like ours come together, the universe responds. And those who are afraid of change, of losing control, will always try to stop it." James let out a slow breath. The weight of it all was beginning to sink in. They weren't just fighting for their own survival. They were fighting for a future that could change everything. "So what happens now?" he asked, his voice filled with determination. "What do we do next?" Alyra smiled, a look of pride in her eyes. "We keep going. We keep fighting. We show them that nothing can break us apart. And we do it together." James's heart swelled with a mix of pride and uncertainty. The journey ahead was still unclear, but in this moment, standing beside Alyra, he knew one thing. They were unstoppable. No matter how many forces stood in their way, they would face them head-on, together. The bond they shared was not just a cosmic connection. It was a promise of unity, strength, and a future that was theirs to shape. As they walked forward, side by side, the station around them seemed less like a cold, mechanical place and more like a world filled with possibilities. The future was unknown, but for the first time in a long while, James felt ready for whatever it held. The bond was fulfilled, not just in power, but in trust. And it was only the beginning. James and Alyra stood at the edge of the station, looking out at the vast expanse of space. The stars stretched out before them like a canvas, endless and full of possibility. They had faced so much together already, but this was different. This moment felt like the start of something even bigger, something that neither of them could have predicted. Elira's hand brushed against his, and the simple gesture sent a rush of warmth through James. The bond they shared was undeniable. It was a connection that had grown stronger with every challenge, every moment they had spent together. And now, standing here, they both knew it was something that could never be broken. "You know," James said, his voice quiet, "I used to think I was just an ordinary guy, just another person on a station full of strangers. But now I feel like I'm part of something much bigger, something that matters." Elira smiled, her gaze softening as she looked at him. "You are part of something bigger, James. You always have been. You just needed to see it." James felt a sense of peace settle over him as he looked at her. He had been afraid, uncertain, and confused for so long. But now, with Elira by his side, everything seemed to make sense. Their bond wasn't just about the two of them. It was about the future they could create together. It was about bringing change, about uniting different worlds and species, and showing everyone that love, trust, and strength could overcome even the greatest of challenges. "The universe isn't as big and mysterious as I thought," James said, his voice filled with awe. "It's full of possibilities, full of people and worlds that I never could have imagined. And now, I get to be a part of it, with you." Elira's eyes gleamed with a mixture of pride and affection. "You've always been a part of it, James. You just needed to open your heart to see it." James reached out, gently taking her hand in his. As their fingers intertwined, he felt the connection between them grow stronger, more vivid. The energy they shared pulsed between them, like a living thing. And in that moment, James knew without a doubt that their journey had only just begun. "We've made it this far," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "And I know we'll keep making it, together." Elira nodded, her smile matching his. "Together, always." As they stood side by side, looking out at the stars, they both understood that their bond was something that transcended time and space. It was more than just fate. It was a choice they had made, a choice to embrace the unknown, to face whatever challenges came their way. And with that choice, they knew they could build a future together, one where their love and their bond would not only change their lives, but the lives of others as well. No matter what the universe had in store for them, they were ready, because they were no longer just a human and an alien. They were a force, bound together, unstoppable in their love and their determination to shape the future. With one last glance at the stars, James squeezed Elira's hand, and together they stepped forward into the unknown. The adventure was just beginning.